So many things here, Dr. Debbie, that we didn't even get into what everyone wants to hear in this case, and no one has released it yet. And I'm hoping that at some point the prosecution says this is why we think he did it. So again, of course, motive, which we talk about all the time, which is not a necessary element of proving the crime, but everyone from John Q. Citizen to Maria Q. Citizen sitting on their couch wants to hear motive. Dr. Debbie.
Thank you. I created a theory, Sergeant Bill, Professor Mike, as to what I think was going on in his mind. And now I believe it was really for a lengthier period of time, and it may have been a year or two or even more, wherein he would have been thinking of this. So my theory I call JAR, J-A-R, jealousy, anger, revenge. I think Bryan Kohberger was jealous of our victims, both individually and collectively. I think they represented a lot of qualities that he did not. They were fun, they were friendly, they were social, they were popular, they were outgoing, and they were a part of things, whereas I think he was apart from things. We don't even know, Sergeant Bill, did he have ever a platonic friendship, let alone any type of intimate relations? So I think the jealousy aspect was front and center. The R, I would say, is for anger. At the time, he was 28 years old, and I think he was angry about where he was, particularly in terms of a social network. There was zero. And then lastly, the R for revenge. He took the ultimate revenge. He was studying this field, I believe, to learn how to commit murder and how to get away with it. And that would be my thinking as a criminologist as to what was going on in his mind and why he did what he did. Plus, we can, add a few more elements, of course. I think the narcissism, the grandiosity, the hedonism. Remember, we have categories of criminals that we refer to as hedonistic killers. They derive pleasure from beginning, middle, to the end. And I think this pleased him, planning it, thinking about it. Also, I think he is somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder, as many of our serial and mass murderers are. And I believe that he is ruminating about all of the colossal errors that he has made. He himself probably can't even believe all of the items and elements that, thankfully, our wonderful law enforcement representatives have been able to discover and recover. And as far as I'm concerned, it's game over for Bryan Kohberger.
I think that a lot of the things that, there is room in this case for the defense to create doubt. But I think a reasonable jury, when they hear the prosecution's case, it'll prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what's important. And I think the evidence to this right now is that the defense is actually, in my mind, making up things. And many people will probably strenuously disagree with me. But they've recently come up with this whole thing because they're trying to prevent him from getting the death penalty. And one of the things that they've just, in my mind, invented is something called autism spectrum disorder. And they even have a doctor that the defense hired to say, yes, he has several or numerous of the necessary symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. But my question is, how come he was never diagnosed with this before when he was a PhD student? Why did it take him to do this horrific act or allegedly commit this, horrific quadruple murder to be diagnosed with this? Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, she's, Ann Taylor's doing the best she can. She got dealt a hard case. She's zealously advocating for her client, Bryan Kohberger. I think she's at the point where she knows that he's going to be convicted. I think she's trying to just demonstrate through these public documents to show that, he's got some issues he's dealing with. The problem is the real relevancy of this. So what if he's autistic or he suffers from something else? How many other people are there in America who may have a diagnosable mental illness, and they get on with their lives. Bryan Kohberger isn't running around naked, howling at the moon, when there's a full moon. No, he's a PhD student. He's got a car. He traveled across the country. He's got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. He's in the process of getting a PhD. He wears, when it's raining, he has an umbrella. When it's cold out, he has gloves on his hands. He's a normal human being. Therefore, even if he has these symptoms, what is the relevance? They don't make you commit murder. How many other people have these issues and they don't commit murder? The doctor could say all that he wants, but he cannot demonstrate that Bryan Kohberger has a propensity for murder, or the affliction, caused him, was the impetus to kill. Not at all.
The defense hired a doctor named Dr. Rachel Orr, and she conducted an evaluation of Kohberger. And she says that he continues to exhibit all the core diagnostic features of autism spectrum disorder, with significant impact on his daily life. Social deficits, including a diminished ability to understand the reactions of others, are perhaps the most widely recognized characteristics of ASD. People with ASD often have difficulty identifying the emotional or mental states, for example, fear and anxiety of others, and how to respond appropriately. Defendants with autism spectrum disorder in criminal court. So what this is attempting to do is to take the death penalty off the case, or off the table. Dr. Orr confirmed that Mr. Kohberger has displayed lifelong deficits in social, emotional reciprocity, including limited perspective taking and limited share of affect emotions of others. That to me sounds like a killer. Sounds like a murderer. Thank you. Thank you for your diagnosis. If this is meant by the defense to use this as a defense so he doesn't get the death penalty, will the judge and the prosecution be impressed with this? There's 4 kids that were laying in a house at 1122 King Road in Idaho that were butchered by a psychopathic killer. Well, now who, if it is Bryan Kohberger, now has autism spectrum disorder. Dr. Debbie.
And I agree with you, Sergeant Bill. If that's the case, why did we not hear about any of this up until now? What happened during the last 2.5 years? And what's the motive? What's the alibi? What is the defense coming in with? Basically, up until most recently, it was this long drive to nowhere with stargazing and looking at the moon. And that was what we discussed, was such a Swiss cheese argument. Way too many holes, little substance. And now we're hearing this. So if that's the case, I'd like to know, when was Bryan Kohberger diagnosed with this?
Just recently. He has no diagnosis prior to this till his attorneys decided, let's come up with this defense called autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
Maybe we'll save his life.
No, but I think what you said about the jury, I believe very strongly in our jury system.